Okay, now we're going to talk about the determinants of the extraction ratio. So we know that the determinants of clearance of any organ is the blood flow to the organ and the extraction efficiency of the organ. So blood flow is pretty straightforward. It's just whatever it is. Extraction efficiency is a little tougher to get at. We are going to assume that the extraction ratio is equal to this equation here, where, so the extraction ratio here is equal to the intrinsic clearance times the fraction unbound of the drug all over the blood flow to the organ times the fraction, or times the intrinsic clearance times the fraction unbound. Okay. So extraction efficiency is big letter E. And we've already talked about big letter E. It's the percentage of drug that is removed as it goes through the clearance organ. Intrinsic clearance is the intrinsic ability of the organ to eliminate drug. So it's organ clearance in a protein-free environment. So a protein-free environment. So unbound drug and without blood flow being an issue. So it's really the intrinsic ability of that organ to, if you think about the liver, it's the intrinsic ability of the liver to metabolize drug. So, do you know what intrinsic means? It means within itself. So if you take away protein binding and you take away blood flow, so take a chunk of liver and put it in a test tube, and then you put in your drug, therefore you don't have binding and you don't have blood flow as a factor, what would be the intrinsic clearance of that particular organ of clearance? Is what this is asked, is what is is intrinsic clearance. So it's the intrinsic ability of the organ to clear drug. Fu is the fraction unbound of the plasma. You're well acquainted with that. And then Q, of course, is the blood flow. This is now talking about extremes of the extraction ratio, high extraction and low extraction drugs. Drugs with high intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound. These are high extraction drugs. So this is just like when we talked before, where it's a high E as the E is approaching 1. When we talked before about the E approaching 1, as it approaches 1, then our clearance, which is dependent upon Q times E, as E approaches 1, Q becomes more and more important, doesn't it? It becomes blood flow dependent. So this is our efficient dairy. This high extraction drug. So in this case, the intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound is so attractive. So the intrinsic clearance is so high, it's so much higher than Q, because Q is the rate limiting step. So Q is much less than the intrinsic clearance time, because this is our shiny dairy. This is our dairy, and these are our trucks. So the trucks are the slower, they're the rate limiting step. You know, if you've ever been on a team, or certainly like a relay team, you're only as fast as your slowest person, right? Your slowest person is your rate limiting step. So in this case, the trucks bringing the drug in, or the blood flow, are the rate limiting step. So this becomes much greater than this. So Q becomes less significant in the denominator as E increases. Now, if you remember, I don't know if I have a slide on this, I'll have to look. Hang on for a minute. Alright, now I want to make another slide here. Okay, so how do I make another? slide. I'll just make a... Okay. So, if you have a fraction, so let's say your fraction is 1 over 100. That's going to be equal to 0.01, right? What if you have 1 over 100 plus 1? What is that? Well, I can tell you it's 0.0099 something. Would you say these two numbers are approximately equal? I would say yes, they're approximately equal. This shows us a rule that we're going to use commonly. If we have a sum in the denominator, like we have here, 100 plus 1, there's no sum in this denominator, but in this denominator we have 100 plus 1. Now it's in the, remember, it's in the denominator of a fraction. If one number is much greater than the other, like it is here, 101, then this one falls out in importance, doesn't it? Really, this is pretty much equal to this. We'll put a little squiggle like approximately equal. So this is approximately equal to this, isn't it? Okay, I hope you can agree. All right, now we're going to go... Oh, I can't do... Okay, I need to go back to my slides. How do I go back to my slides? That's not it. That's not it. Okay, good. So, again, we're still with our high extraction drug. Oopsie. Oop, I don't want that. We're still with our high extraction drug. How do I go back to the slide? Will this allow me to do the slide? No. Sorry guys, I'm still learning how to use this if you can't tell. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. Alright, well. Alright, so I guess I can't write on this, but maybe I can write this. Okay, so as your clearance times fraction unbound, why is that doing that? Sorry, still learning here. Okay. As your, why is that so much lower than where I'm, your Q will become less significant as E is approaching 1. So what happens here is that because our Q is much less than our intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound, then our Q will fall out of this equation, and still don't know how to get back to that. There we go. Our Q will fall out of the equation, and E will become approximately equal to 1 because this falls out, because intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound is so much greater than Q. It's just like our 100 plus 1. The 1 falls out. Q falls out. So E will be approximating 100%. So if we have a drug with very high extraction ratio, doesn't it make sense that E would be approaching 1? So we can all live with that, I hope. So E will be approaching 1. Will be approximately equal to 1. Okay. So, drugs with a high extraction ratio, Q will fall out of the... Okay, so you might ask me, why does Q not go away here? Well, is that in the denominator? No, it's not. It's not a sum in the denominator. Remember, you have to have a sum in the denominator, and if one is much greater, much greater than the other, then this will fall out. So that's why clearance. So if this all becomes 1, then clearance will be approximated by Q. This is really important, right? So what this tells us is for a high extraction drug, so for high E, our clearance is approximated by Q. So you ask me what determines clearance? Well, for this type of drug with a high extraction ratio, it's blood flow to the organ. If the blood flow increases, clearance increases. If the blood flow decreases, then clearance will decrease. So if you ask, what are the determinants of clearance? Well, for a high extraction drug, it's blood flow to the organ. We're getting to the bottom of things, aren't we? Now, what if we go to the other extreme? And now we're talking about drugs with a low extraction ratio. These are our rusty dairies. So the other was our shiny dairy, that everything was, the rate limiting step was the milk being delivered to the dairy. This is a rusty dairy. So the milk is being delivered, but the dairy itself is just not working well. It's rusty. It's not, the milk just piles up. So here, Q is not the rate limiting step, but the intrinsic clearance, the intrinsic ability of the drug to clear to be cleared, is what the rate limiting step is. So clearance times fraction unbound will fall out of our equation, because this is like 100 plus 1. It's the other way this time, right? So this falls out of the equation. And our extraction ratio becomes dependent upon intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound all over Q. You can read my writing at all. So sure enough, it's our rate limiting step. Our rate limiting step is intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound. So that falls out of the denominator, and we end up with this equal, with this equal to, this falls out. So E is equal to intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound over Q. This is E, right? And then if we want to know what happens with clearance, it's Q times E. So these Q's will cancel, won't they? And our clearance will be, our clearance will be determined by intrinsic clearance and fraction unbound. So you're going to say, wait, Dr. Earl, you just said clearance was dependent upon blood flow. That was for a high extraction drug, a drug with a high, where it's for our shiny dairy, where the rate limiting step is the blood flow coming into the organ. This is the rusty dairy, the low extraction drug. So here, we've got the low intrinsic clearance times fraction unbound, low E. Therefore, the intrinsic clearance, this is the rate limiting step, so it falls out of the denominator, and then these two Q's cancel. So for a low extraction drug, clearance is dependent upon intrinsic clearance and fraction unbound. You already know what determines fraction unbound. Now we're going to dig into what determines intrinsic clearance. Isn't this exciting? We're getting deeper and deeper. So much fun. All right, we'll do that next time. Thanks. Bye.